We love to think of history as this grand story of progress, built by heroes, thinkers, and innovators. But what if that's only half the story? What if some of the biggest leaps forward our world has ever taken weren't inspired by our best and brightest, but were actually forced upon us by our worst nightmares? What if the very systems we count on for safety and justice were built on a foundation of terror? This is the unsettling truth of how some of history's most monstrous serial killers accidentally became catalysts for change. Their brutal crimes were more than just headlines. They were earthquakes that cracked the foundations of society, forcing us to rebuild. This isn't a new phenomenon either. Back in the 1890s, characters like H.H. Holmes and his infamous murder castle had already turned murder into a terrifying public spectacle. But the real story is how the monsters who came after him didn't just take lives. They inadvertently built the world we live in today. Imagine London, 1888. The foggy alleys of Whitechapel are lit by gas lamps, and a ghost is on the loose, turning the city into his own personal theater of horror. With every new victim, the panic grows. The police are clueless, and the public is terrified. What nobody knows is that the man they recalling Jack the Ripper isn't just ending lives, he's creating the future. His bloody rampage would forever change how we hunt killers and even how we get our news. But his reign of terror was just the beginning. The real story is what we built from the wreckage he left behind. Story 1. Jack the Ripper. The birth of modern media and forensic investigation. To get why Jack the Ripper was such a big deal, you have to picture his world. Late 19th century London was a city of two halves. On one hand, it was the glittering heart of a global empire. On the other, the East End district of Whitechapel was a maze of poverty and despair. Life was cheap, and for the women walking the streets, it was incredibly dangerous. Between August and November of 1888, at least 5 of these women, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, were viciously murdered. The killer wasn't just a murderer, he was a butcher, displaying a chilling, surgical precision that terrified the Victorian public. The effect was immediate. A thick fog of fear settled over London, but it was mixed with a morbid fascination. And this is where the first major change happened, the birth of modern crime reporting. Before the Ripper, newspaper crime stories were usually dry and to the point, but the Autumn of Terror was a full-blown media sensation. Aided by a newly literate working class and cheap, penny dreadful papers, the case became the world's first true crime frenzy. Journalists swarmed Whitechapel, fighting for every gruesome detail, and when facts were hard to come by, they just made them up. The press even gave the killer his name, Jack the Ripper, a name that likely came from a journalist, his letter to a news agency that got published and stuck. In branding him, they turned an unknown killer into a terrifying cultural icon. Newspapers printed graphic drawings of the crime scenes, feeding a public hunger for the macabre, and sometimes fueling xenophobia by sketching the killer with anti-Semitic features, which only wasted police time. On one hand, the media created mass hysteria. On the other, it forced the wealthy to finally look at the horrifying poverty in their own backyard, sparking a long overdue conversation about social reform. But the biggest impact was on policing. The hunt for Jack the Ripper was, to put it bluntly, a total disaster. The London Metropolitan Police was completely out of its depth. This was before forensics. Things we take for granted today, like fingerprinting or psychological profiling, simply didn't exist. Crime scenes weren't preserved, they were trampled by crowds. Evidence was contaminated or just missed. It's estimated the police were buried under hundreds of thousands of letters from the public, most of them useless. The Ripper's ability to vanish exposed just how outdated their methods were. He was a new kind of predator, a mobile killer who targeted strangers, making traditional detective work useless. The humiliation of this failure forced a reckoning at Scotland Yard. The case highlighted the desperate need for a more scientific approach. Pathologists like Dr. Thomas Bond performed what might be the very first offender profile, speculating that the killer was a man of solitary habits, prone to homicidal and erotic mania. The Ripper was never caught, but his ghost haunted the halls of Scotland Yard for generations. The failures of 1888 became the brutal lesson upon which modern criminal investigation would be built. Story 2. Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. The perils of tunnel vision. Almost a century later, another monster haunted the streets of northern England, and he would expose a whole new set of police failures. His name was Peter Sutcliffe, but the press called him the Yorkshire Ripper. From 1975 to 1980, Sutcliffe murdered 13 women and attacked 7 others. Just like his Victorian predecessor, he terrified the community. The pressure to catch him sparked one of the biggest manhunts in British history, and yet for 5 years he just kept killing, slipping through the cracks again and again. How? The investigation is now a textbook example of police failure, thanks to a toxic mix of bad attitudes, incompetence, and one of history's most infamous hoaxes. The first mistake was a crippling institutional bias. Senior detectives decided early on that the killer only targeted sex workers. This dangerous idea had 2 terrible consequences. First, they dismissed attacks on women who weren't sex workers, missing crucial connections. The prosecutor at Sutcliffe's trial even said that while some victims were prostitutes, perhaps the saddest part of the case is that some were not. A shocking statement that implied some victims were more innocent than others, and revealed a mindset that completely handicapped the investigation. Second, this tunnel vision blinded them to a killer like Sutcliffe, who was driven by a general, all-consuming hatred of women. The second failure was logistical. In an era right before computers, the police were drowning in paperwork. The incident room's floor actually had to be reinforced to hold the weight of all the files. Their card indexing system was a joke, making it impossible to cross-reference information. The numbers are staggering. Peter Sutcliffe was interviewed by police 9 times during the investigation. A friend even sent an anonymous letter pointing the finger at him. But because of the chaotic filing system, the dots were never connected. The most dramatic failure, though, was the Wareside Jack hoax. In 1979, the lead investigator, George Oldfield, received letters and a tape from a man claiming to be the Ripper. The man on the tape had a distinctive accent from the Wareside area. Despite warnings that it was probably a hoax, Oldfield became obsessed. He was sure this was his man. This mistake derailed the entire investigation for over a year. Suspects who didn't have a Wareside accent, like Peter Sutcliffe, who was from Yorkshire, were ignored. This blunder gave Sutcliffe the freedom to kill at least 3 more women. Sutcliffe's capture wasn't the result of great detective work, it was pure luck. In 1981, he was caught in a car with a sex worker, and when brought in for a false license plate, he confessed. The public was outraged. The case led to the Byford Report, a review that demanded huge changes. It called for the creation of a national computerized system for major investigations, HOMES, the Home Office Large Major Inquiry System. It was a direct response to the paper-based chaos that let Sutcliffe get away with murder for so long. Story 3. Ted Bundy, the catalyst for centralized FBI profiling. In the 1970s, America was haunted by a new kind of predator, a man who was handsome, charming, smart, and a complete monster. His name was Ted Bundy, and his cross-country killing spree would expose a fatal flaw in American law enforcement. Starting in 1974, young women started vanishing across the Pacific Northwest. Witnesses recalled a good-looking young man, sometimes faking an injury, who would ask for help. He was the boy next door, a wolf in sheep's clothing, and local police were stumped. Then Bundy moved to Utah for law school, and the disappearances followed him. Then to Colorado, then to Idaho. He was a ghost, leaving a trail of bodies across state lines. This was a problem police were totally unequipped to handle. Back then, police departments operated in their own little worlds. A detective in Washington had no easy way to know a detective in Colorado was working an almost identical crime. There was no national database for violent crime. Bundy knew this and used it to his advantage. Crossing a state line was like hitting the reset button. Bundy was eventually arrested in 1975, but he later managed 2 daring escapes. His second escape in 1977 triggered a massive manhunt, and the true scale of his crimes finally started to become clear. This is where the FBI's brand new behavioral science unit stepped in. At Quantico, a small team of agents like Robert Ressler were pioneering a new technique. using psychology to profile unknown killers. They were interviewing incarcerated murderers to understand how they think. The Bundy case was a watershed moment for them. As local cops struggled to connect the dots, the BSU saw the bigger picture. They analyzed his methods, his preference for young women with long dark hair, his use of the fake injury ploy. They understood his charm wasn't a sign of innocence, but a predator's tool. Bundy was living proof that a new, geographically transient killer existed, and a national response was needed. His reign of terror was the ultimate argument for the creation of the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime, NCAVC, in 1985. Within it was the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, or VICAP, a national database designed to do exactly what local police couldn't: connect the dots across state lines and catch the next Ted Bundy before his victim list grew. After his final capture in Florida, Bundy's trial became one of the first to be nationally televised. Acting as his own lawyer, he played to the cameras, and the American public watched, horrified as this handsome, articulate man was revealed for the monster he was. Bundy shattered the stereotype of the creepy loner killer, forcing everyone to confront a terrifying new reality. Monsters can look just like us. Story 4: The Communicators, Son of Sam, BTK, and the Weaponization of Media. Some killers didn't just expose flaws in the system, they actively manipulated it. They understood the power of the media to create fear and build a personal brand. In the late 70s, two killers hundreds of miles apart would master this dark art: David Berkowitz, the Son of Sam, and Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. In the summer of '76, New York City was on edge. A gunman was randomly targeting young people in parked cars with a .44 caliber handgun. Then the killer started writing letters. He sent rambling notes to columnist Jimmy Breslin and the police, giving himself a name: the Son of Sam. The media published the letters, and they were terrifyingly irresistible. The letters turned David Berkowitz from an anonymous shooter into a citywide bogeyman. The press became his partner, broadcasting his threats and amplifying the terror. After his capture in 1977, a new, ugly issue emerged. Book and movie producers were lining up to pay him for his story. The thought of a man murdering 6 people and then getting rich from it was sickening. New York's legislature acted fast, passing what became known as the Son of Sam law. It was designed to stop criminals from profiting from their crimes, seizing any earnings to compensate victims. While the original law was later challenged, today some 40 states have similar laws, a direct legacy of the celebrity status Berkowitz achieved. At the same time, another killer was starting his own reign of terror in Wichita, Kansas. Dennis Rader called himself BTK for Bind, Torture, Kill. On the surface, Rader was a boring family man and church leader. Secretly, he was a monster. Like Son of Sam, BTK craved attention. He sent taunting letters to news stations, demanding a cool nickname and national recognition. He created his own BTK brand and controlled the narrative. Then, for 25 years, he went silent. The BTK case went cold, but in 2004, his ego got the best of him, and he resurfaced, sending packages and puzzles. This need to communicate was his downfall. In one message, he asked police if he could send a floppy disk without being traced. Seeing their chance, the police placed an ad in the paper: "Rex, it will be okay." It was a lie. Rader sent the disk. Forensic analysts recovered deleted data from it that pointed them straight to Dennis's at the Christ Lutheran Church. The trail quickly led to Dennis Rader, the church council president. His reign of terror, built on media manipulation, was ended by his own ego and a piece of outdated technology. Story 5: The Golden State Killer and the Dawn of a New Age. For over a decade, from 1974 to 1986, a ghost haunted California. He was known as the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker, and finally, the Golden State Killer. He was responsible for at least 13 murders, over 50 rapes, and more than 120 burglaries. His crimes were so widespread that for years, police didn't even know it was all one man. He would vanish for 30 years, leaving behind one of America's most chilling cold cases. The only thing connecting his crimes was his DNA, a genetic fingerprint left at numerous scenes. But without a suspect to match it to, the DNA profile was a key without a lock. The case seemed hopeless. Then everything changed. A new tool emerged, one that was never meant for law enforcement: consumer genealogy websites. Millions of people were spitting into tubes and uploading their DNA to public sites like GDmatch, hoping to find a long-lost cousin. Without realizing it, they were building a massive, searchable map of the human family tree. Cold case investigators, holding the killer's DNA from a 1980s crime scene, had a radical idea. In 2017, they uploaded his genetic profile to GEDmatch. They didn't find him, but they found a distant relative, a great-great-great-grandparent he shared with a few users on the site. This was the thread they needed. Working with forensic genealogists, they built out family trees, looking for a man of the right age who lived in the right places at the right times. The search eventually narrowed to a 72-year-old retired cop living in a quiet Sacramento suburb, Joseph James D'Angelo. To confirm, they needed his DNA. Investigators put him under surveillance and grabbed a tissue he threw in a trash can. They took it to the lab. It was a perfect match. The ghost who haunted California for 40 years finally had a name. D'Angelo's arrest in 2018 was a revolution. The technique, known as investigative genetic genealogy, blew the world of cold cases wide open. In the years since, hundreds of dormant murder and rape cases have been solved using this exact method, giving answers to families who had lost all hope. Of course, it also opened a huge can of worms about genetic privacy and consent. People who uploaded their DNA to trace their family history never imagined they were also pointing a finger at a distant relative in a murder case. The Golden State Killer's elusiveness, his ability to outsmart every traditional method, is what forced this innovation. Joseph D'Angelo thought he'd gotten away with it. But his own DNA became a ticking time bomb, finally going off 40 years later and launching a new era of criminal justice. Synthesis, the broader impact. When you look at the stories of these men, Jack the Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, Ted Bundy, and the others, a clear, if disturbing, pattern emerges. It's a recurring theme in history. Profound tragedy becomes the unwilling parent of innovation. Each of these killers held up a mirror, showing us the cracks in our society that we could no longer ignore. Jack the Ripper's butchery forced the first steps toward modern forensics. The Yorkshire Ripper's rampage, helped by police bias and mountains of paperwork, was a brutal argument for computerizing police work. Ted Bundy's road trip of death led directly to the FBI's behavioral science unit and the systems we now use to track mobile predators. The taunts of Son of Sam and BTK forced us to create laws to stop killers from profiting from their fame. And the decades-long mystery of the Golden State Killer pushed forensics into an entirely new age. Their evil acted as a stress test on our systems. And in the places where those systems broke, we were forced to rebuild them, stronger and smarter than before. History remembers the names of monsters: Jack the Ripper, Ted Bundy, BTK. They're symbols of the darkest side of human nature. But the most important part of their legacy isn't what they did. It's what we did in response. Their reigns of terror forced us to evolve. The failure to catch a killer in Victorian London planted the seeds of forensic science. The struggle to track a predator across state lines built the architecture of modern criminal profiling. A 40-year-old cold case, solved with a technique that sounds like science fiction, has revolutionized our ability to find answers in the dark. These advancements weren't gifts. They were paid for with the lives of the innocent, a grim inheritance of unimaginable loss. It's a deeply uncomfortable truth that many of our most vital systems for justice and protection have their roots in the actions of those who only wanted to destroy. It's a powerful reminder that society is constantly evolving, often forced to adapt not by its best intentions, but in the face of its worst nightmares. The world we live in today, with its advanced labs and national crime databases, was, in part, accidentally built by the very monsters it was designed to stop. If you found this look into the hidden side of history interesting, subscribe for more stories like this.